Welcome to Remote Work Wednesday on behalf of the Remote Online Initiative and the K-State Research and Extension Community Vitality Team. I'm Ron Wilson, Director of the Huck Boyd Institute for Rural Development at K-State and part of the Extension Community Vitality Team. This call is a project of the Remote Online Initiative. As you can see on the screen, the website is kansasremotework.com. And through that site, we're offering month-long online classes that enable participants to become trained and certified as a remote worker or a remote work team leader. It's a free Zoom call on the second Wednesday of each month for anyone interested in remote work and the challenges and opportunities associated with remote work. And so we really appreciate you joining us and participating. Next month, we'll have April Darnell speaking. Her topic is From Wish to Working Remotely. She was a campus professional in Manhattan who is now working remotely from Florida after participating in one of our remote online initiative classes. So she has some firsthand experience in the action steps that she took to work remotely. Our own Deborah Kohl is our presenter today. I call Deborah a rock star since she's become a state specialist in community vitality for K-State Research and Extension, and is also our program leader coordinator for community vitality for Extension. In fact, speaking of working remotely, she is joining us remotely from the national meeting that she's participating in West Virginia today. So we're really glad to have her here. Forgive me, I have a dad joke that relates to this. And I saw this on a greeting card just the other night. The guy says, I know how my life is going to end. And the other guy says, how? And he says, well, my kids are going to unplug me from the life support system so that they can charge their phones. So that kind of relates to our topic for today. Sorry, Deborah. But she's really talking about in the remote work setting, how can we unplug ourselves? How can we recharge ourselves, regain our energy when we're not side by side with our peers? So with that, let's welcome Deborah. Thanks, Deborah.
Thanks, Ron. It is such a privilege to get to work with you every day. I am so thankful for that. And that joke notwithstanding, I love having you as a coworker. I am Deborah Kohl. Thanks for the introduction. We're talking a little bit about unplugging and recharging in the remote work environment today. And I have a little bit, here's where we're going to go. We're going to spend a little tiny bit of time talking about why it's so hard to unplug, and then talk about why we need to unplug, and then look through some practical tools for disconnecting, some strategies we can do, and then some tools that we can provide to help folks disconnect from our remote work environment. And as a logistical note, Ron, if we have anybody else join, I think I'm going to need you to admit them because I've got to run all the other screens for the presentation. I have focused this presentation and our time together today with two audiences in mind. First, we need to own that we've got some remote work leaders on this call and who participate in our courses and watch the videos at the end. So I'll have a few notes for our leaders, but then also for our teammates, those of us who work remotely or in a dispersed team, and what do we need to be doing? So I have two levels of information to share. And I do need to own that some of us are team members and leaders all at the same time. So this work is important for all of us to do. So let's just acknowledge unplugging is hard. And the more I thought about this topic and thought about what I could share, we need to acknowledge that unplugging is hard for everyone, whether we are in a remote work environment or not. But there are some things that are unique to the remote workspace that make it exceptionally hard to disconnect. And I want to talk a little bit about those and honor the fact that the work we do remotely is additionally complex. So There are three types of boundaries that end up getting blurred, and that is pretty much why it's difficult for us to unplug. The first boundary that gets blurred is our physical boundaries. Especially if you're working remotely from home, your home is suddenly your office, and your first place, your home, has blurred into your second space, which is typically our work environment. And that leads to a situation sometimes where certain rooms and areas in your home can become negatively associated with work pressures, looming deadlines, and that kind of erodes the sacred space of our homes and that first place sanctuary. So, something to keep in mind there. That leads into some of the temporal blurring that we see within the remote work environment. So, the expectation of availability far beyond traditional working hours if you work remote. This is fueled often by the nature of the digital communication tools that we use when we work exclusively remotely and the demands of asynchronous workflows. So, if you've got teams that are dispersed across multiple time zones, that can even amplify the whole temporal blurring, the need to be available all the time. It is common for remote workers to find themselves checking work-related communications, whether that be emails or team notifications, first thing in the morning and last thing before we go to bed. And part of this is because of a phenomenon called digital presenteeism. Before I talk about that a little bit, I want to just acknowledge also that I check my email first thing in the morning and last thing before I go to bed often. And I am not an exclusively remote worker. I think the technology in general has driven some of this temporal blurring, but it shows up uniquely in the remote workspace. So, digital presenteeism is based on traditional presenteeism, which actually started to be identified and studied when we were still all face to face, when there wasn't really remote work. Um, if you want to think about how many times, if you are in a physical, present, co-located environment, how many times folks go to work when they're sick, that's because of the phenomenon called presenteeism. Or when folks show up in a meeting because they should be there, not participating, but you go to the meeting because you're supposed to be there, whether you're providing value in that space or not. That's presenteeism. There is a perception of value of being seen in an environment. And in the remote workplace, it takes on a different frame. So part of maintaining that constant online presence to demonstrate the fact that you are being productive and that you are connected to your team. You try to show up all the time through email responses, through responding to notifications as soon as they come in, and attending virtual meetings with your camera off sometimes, not because your connectivity is bad, but because you're just kind of holding space in that meeting to be seen so folks know that you're there. Um, that adds additional layers of complexity and stress to this temporal blurring phenomenon. The final one is the psychological blurring, and that takes place because of the physical and the temporal blurring, the constant accessibility, the physical blurring, and the desire to meet those expectations of being available to work makes it really psychologically challenged to log off and mentally disengage from the work we've been given to do remotely. And workers already take fewer breaks than our in-office counterparts. We know that is a statistic that has held true over time. It's just hard to disengage, even when you are like the individual in this picture sitting on a beach, because we are so constantly connected. And we know that unplugging is important. So I'm going to go through just a few reasons why. Most of this is already known and experienced by those of us who work remotely, but we have to unplug because if we don't, we experience burnout and emotional exhaustion, stress, anxiety, mental health decline, reduced productivity and creativity, work-family conflict, social isolation, and it spirals in the remote environment in a unique way because we have this always on culture. We have the pressure to be continually and constantly available, which leads us to overwork, which leads to burnout, which can lead to a diminished level of productivity and increased likelihood of errors, which means that we're working longer hours to overcome all of those pieces in that downward spiral. When you go through that list of things that I just categorized off of all the detriments to not unplugging, those are also some of the arguments that we hear from non-adopters of the remote work environment as reasons why people shouldn't work remote. So for those of us who get to work remote and who have maintain the boundaries that we need to be able to be really productive in that environment, I think it's incumbent upon us to make sure that we are truly architecting good boundaries so that we can continue to show that remote work is a viable thing and we can do it and we can do it well and professionally. So we obviously, as what I just said, need to unplug to improve our mental health and well-being, to reduce burnout and stress, to enhance our performance, and to reduce our fatigue. So that's a lot of background to get us to the nuts and bolts of how can we do this and do it better. So I started at the beginning talking about the different boundaries that get blurred, the physical, temporal, and psychological boundaries that become blurred. So the best way to overcome the physical overlap that makes it mentally hard to leave work um, is to architect good boundaries. So here's some strategies to do that. As we're looking at the physical and temporal demarcation of the spaces in which we work, this is basic remote work practice, establishing specific dedicated areas for our work. It doesn't necessarily need to be a separate room in your environment. It could be a designated desk or a corner, but it needs to be one that you are consistently only using for work tasks. Avoid areas that are associated with relaxation and personal time. So your sofa or your bed, it's super really tempting sometimes to take a Zoom call on the couch. But what our research is showing us is that really having that structured space and working in that structured environment that is truly just designated for work can increase your performance 13% than if you choose to not be consistent or you don't have a space that's set up initially as your workspace. The APA studies have shown that the separation between the work and home life will contribute to reduced stress. So being very clear in making those boundaries for ourselves. Another great strategy to engage in is to establish start and stop rituals at the beginning and end of our days. So this is replicating the traditional start and stop of a work day prior to all of the technological access that we had. In the morning, you're tidying up your living space before you're entering into your workspace. Have your customary beverage, whether that be coffee or tea or water, soda, whatever it is, your work beverage that you're going to take with you to work. Have that ready to go, prepare it, play specific music for energy and focus. This is your work playlist, your walk-up list as you walk into your work environment. Maybe do some light exercises to get your blood moving and get you kind of transitioned into your next place. Dress in your work attire before you go to work. These are all things that are signaling to your brain that it is time to shift into work mode and engage with your professional responsibilities. I had a colleague who worked remotely long, long before COVID, and she would physically get into her vehicle, drive around the block, come back to her home, walk into her work office. She needed that practice and that ritual to signal to herself it was time to go to work. At the end of the day, she did the exact same thing in reverse. Walked out to her garage, got in her car, drove the opposite way around the block, and came home. And in that time, it just gave her the physical ability and the psychological ability to step away. Additional end of the day rituals could be things like making the list of all of your completed tasks, your to-dos for the day. Plan your next day's to-do list. Tidy up your physical workspace. If you're on your laptop and it's your personal laptop as well as your professional laptop, close out all your work tabs before you walk away from your desk or you take your laptop with you. Organize those emails, again, tidying up your digital workspace. If you have tasks that you avoided during the day, break those down for future action, set a firm end time on them, put them on your calendar. Change into your play clothes, go for a walk, signaling to your body that transition. If you've got some end of the day music that you play for the last 15 to 20 minutes of your time in office, get that stuff queued up and ready to go, play it, and then exit your workspace. Some very important things to remember with these start and stop rituals. The number one key to their success is being consistent with them, doing them regularly. The reason why scheduling unfinished tasks is such a high priority for folks as you're doing your end of day rituals is that that helps you cognitively offload those tasks. So we're countering the zygarnik effect, which is a psychological phenomenon where our brains fixate on the things that we didn't get done. That isn't necessarily based on your temperament type. We do a lot of joking about our different temperaments and our golds who are very task oriented and need to check things off their list. It isn't just isolated to one type of personality or temperament. All of us have a tendency or can be prone to a tendency to focus on those unfinished tasks. So when you're scheduling them and you're breaking them down into achievable steps and scheduling them for the next day or sometime down the road, what you're doing is externalizing them and placing them on a calendar. And that will facilitate the psychological detachment that you need, reducing your mental noise from work, diminishing the rumination that you're going to be doing on those tasks, and that can promote that mental peace that you need to be able to transition to your next step. Reviewing your progress for the day and acknowledging that you have those completed tasks kind of underpins Teresa Amabile's work, which talks about improving mood, positive emotions, motivation at the end of the day. Very important for our ability to transition and not take work home with us at night, whether we're in a remote or a co-located or face-to-face location. Another boundary that we can work on architecting a little bit differently in the remote environment is our time. So, setting and communicating clear work hours to our teammates and to our colleagues and our managers is really important. I'm going to take it a step further and say that I think it's also very important to communicate those clear work hours to our household members to manage their expectations. I'm looking forward to seeing some research that should come out in the next 10 years about what it looks like to be a work at home remote parent or caregiver when you have all of those multiple roles that kind of conflict and collide into one another. When I'm at work, I can get a text or a phone call from my dependents and I can choose whether or not I take those. But if I'm in a physical environment with them, it's a lot more difficult to not pay attention to them and their needs in the real moment. So communicating our work hours with our families and those that we're in the physical presence with is really, really important so that their expectations can also be managed. Time blocking is another way that we can architect our time. So finding time to do our deep work, the stuff that needs our full concentration and attention and takes a lot of energy. Then alternating that with maybe some administrative or shallow work. We'll talk a little bit about what those things can be in just a minute. Setting aside to block specific times for meetings, making sure I'm building in regular breaks, and also our personal activities whenever that falls during the day. So if you're like someone in extension who is given the gift of using professional scheduling so that if I have evening meetings that I can't move, they have to be in the evening, I'm blocking special time to compensate for those meetings and using that professional scheduling well. The key to that is the scheduling and the discipline to make sure that you have it on your calendar. Some other methods for and tools for architecting our time would include the Pomodoro method. We've had several speakers in our Remote Work Wednesdays series talk about Pomodoro, and I put on there a tomato timer. A few years ago, I was at a trade show and we were preaching Pomodoro to our students who were working full time at the same time to help them be more productive and manage well. And we bought Pomodoro timers that were shaped in a tomato like this. I just love these. So basically, this method helps you to budget your time. 25 minutes of focus time to work on a project. And then your timer goes off and you get a short 5 minute break. And then you've got another Pomodoro round for 25 minutes. And after four Pomodoros, you're taking a longer 15 to 30-minute break. You're getting up, you're walking away from your desk, you're separating from that work. And that just truly helps us to be more productive and focused during that 25-minute period of time. Task batching is combining similar, smaller tasks into a batch. So this would be what I was just talking about with the administrative or shallow work, checking email, making routine phone calls, processing other mail or bills or things like that, doing some accounting work if it's just bill processing. Putting those types of projects together allows you to check multiple things off of your list in the shallow time, but also helps kind of avoid some of that cognitive cost that's associated with context switching between the different tasks and task types that we have. Task batching has proven to be more effective than constantly needing to come back to your email and things like that. I had a colleague earlier in my career who put in her auto reply on her email just the notification, and she set this boundary and communicated it to all of us as her colleagues that she would check email 2 times a day. She had a blocked hour in the morning and a blocked hour at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And those were the times where she would check her email. She would then put the tasks that arose in her email onto her work plan. But she was only logged into email during that time and she physically logged out of the program. so that she was not distracted by the constant barrage. And she was very highly effective at the work that she did. Now, on the flip side, as a colleague with probably not so strong boundaries, that was really frustrating for me. But what she did was she also helped me by holding to that boundary. She helped me change the way that I was working so that I could be respectful of her and her boundaries. And I worked my day differently because I knew that those were the times she was going to be able to get to anything I sent her an email. Architecting boundaries with notifications. I have on this slide, you can see if you're a Teams user or your organization uses Teams, there are step-by-step screens that will drop you through how to set your notification timing. So you can disable, essential and non-essential notifications from your work applications. It doesn't matter if it's Slack or your email or your Teams, those notifications can be disabled on your personal devices, especially outside of your designated work hours. So step one, figure out what your work hours are. Step two, plug your work in. Step three, set up your notification management system so that you can not be getting notifications at all hours when you are not in the office. Instead of reacting to every alert, if you've task batched that we just talked about and you're disciplined, you can also check your notifications at specific times if you've set them to silent. Studies show that the average worker is interrupted or switches tasks as frequently as every 6 minutes. So every 6 minutes, our concentration is being messed with, and that will increase our stress, our anxiety, and leads to higher error rates in the work that we're doing. So setting the do not disturb feature or setting your notifications differently can really reduce this distraction and can also reduce your fear of missing out, that FOMO that everybody's always talking about, because you know you're going to get back to it eventually. Taking a break is another great way to architect boundaries. So short micro breaks where you get up, you walk around, you stretch, you do 5 minute chair yoga, whatever it is, take those breaks. Schedule and use your paid time off and your vacation time that your company or organization provides. Use your mental health days. Use your sick leave. Don't just show up for a virtual meeting when you're sick because you can log in. Use your sick time and use it wisely. Um, Focus on the quality of the time that you're spending, not the quantity. So you can take a week off, but if you have chosen to check email every day and that is your choice, it's totally yours to make, but that's going to deplete the quality of your away time and will actually diminish your ability to psychologically disengage and then refresh. So make sure you're focusing on what you're actually doing with the time you've taken off and get a hobby. For real. I know a lot of people joke about having hobbies, but legitimately, we've got some studies that are showing that having a hobby that is not work related, that requires you to actively engage with it and think about it, so not just playing Sudoku on your phone, but a real hobby that you are truly working on, crafting something, building something, reading something, engaging mentally in a different way is a huge way to take a break. So I focused a little bit about things that all of us working remotely, but specifically as an employee, we can be doing. And what I want to do now is shift a little bit and focus on our leaders. I'm going to start with a little bit of instruction, and that is that I think if you are in a position of leadership, you have a duty and an obligation to the people whose precious lives and careers you hold. Their identities are often tied to those things, and you need to lead well, especially in a remote environment. A lot of the psychological negatives that we see as associated with remote work are not necessarily tied to the worker and their ability to do remote work. It is tied to the leadership that leads remote teams. And we have one of our former presenters on this call who did a fantastic job about talking about what makes a good fit for a remote worker. I'd really encourage you to go back and look at the recordings of some of the previous speakers we've had in the Remote Work Wednesday series to kind of think through what are some things about as we're talking about what's a good fit for an employee who can work remotely. Absolutely. And we have to think about what are we doing as leadership as we're leading those teams. So let's do some lead well work here as far as helping folks recharge and setting up cultures and organizations where remote work can truly be done effective. So one of the number one things that really creates stress and contributes to the burnout and that always on culture in a remote environment is misaligned expectations regarding availability, workload, and deadlines. So as a leader, and a manager, we need to be choosing the tools for synchronous and asynchronous communication well. We need to have clear purposes for each of them, and we need to be clearly communicating and proactively communicating with our teams to preempt many of the burnout and stress related issues that we might see. So again, as I just said, one of the things that can go a long way to this is having a communication charter in your organization on your team. Identify what the official tools are that everybody needs to be proficient in and provide the skills and training that they need to be proficient in them. If you've got a team member who is really struggling with your official tool, it's your job as a leader to help them get comfortable and remove whatever barriers are there, whether it be, end user error, whether it be something in your system or permissions. You need to work with that employee until that solution is solved, or that cannot be an official tool that your organization is going to use because if they can't access it, they can't communicate with the rest of the team, and that is isolating. Outline when and how to use the tools that you've chosen. So you may have different communication tools for different scenarios, different type of work. Make sure those are clearly stated in your communication charter. Communicate expected response times, and those times can vary and be differently for each tool. Clearly, if you've got someone who is only checking email 2 times a day, and that is the boundary that they have set to be efficient and to give you their very best, your response time cannot be 35 minutes to every email. And if you don't hear from them in 35 minutes, probably isn't best practice to start pinging them on your other communication channels. So make sure that those expected response times are clearly communicated and that your employees have had an opportunity to speak into those a little bit. Step 2 in leading well, develop clear vacation and time off expectations. Um, very clearly, the expectation is you use the time that you're given. And if you're not using the time that you're given, we're going to have an honest conversation about why you feel like you can't step away from work. And then when you are able to step away from work, when we've made that a reality for you, we're going to make sure that we have a communication plan for the rest of our team that includes the handover of responsibilities. I have clearly taken care of all of these communication pieces. I have an unplug strategy, which is my very specific strategy for disconnecting while I'm out. And then as a leader, I'm going to practice what I've preached to you, and I'm going to do the same thing. And I'm not going to respond to you unless it's an emergency situation that has been clearly laid out in our response plan, or, you have a personal phone call that you want to make to me about something outside of work. Other than that, I'm probably not going to respond to you because I need you to see me living out what I've asked you to do as well. So third thing in this leading well piece and clear communication is the performance management expectations. If my staff know that my evaluation of them is not tied to how many times I see their picture in a Zoom meeting, maybe they'll find a way to either A, show up with the camera on, or B, show up and participate and know that they're not going to be multitasking while we're in meetings. We could do a whole different section about designing good online meetings and making meetings matter online, but basically, I need to communicate with them what my performance management expectations are. I need to be proactive, include how they're going to be measured, what their productivity guidelines are, and what I need to be seeing out of them, what the targets are for that productivity, and then what the realistic timeframes are for all of the work to get done. And I need to work with them to make sure everything here is clear on that left-hand column. My communication with them about performance management should be frequent. It should be transparent. We should be able to put things on the table. It needs to be two-way. I need to be listening and talking not at the same time, but listening and talking in the same conversation. And then we need to be consistent. Those scheduled one-on-ones, they're scheduled for a reason. And as a leader, especially if I am a face-to-face leader in a co-located environment with some co-located employees, and I have 1 or 2 remote workers, they are banking on that time and they are likely saving things for that time to meet with me. A remote worker isn't going to get the same bump into me in the hallway, I'm coming down the hall and knocking on my door type of an interaction that I would in a face-to-face environment. And that's fine. That's absolutely fine. But I need to be honoring the times that I've set aside to meet with them and treating that as a valuable time in my life and theirs. So again, communication charter, explicit instructions for urgent and non-urgent matters, how we're going to handle those things within our performance management, what my upfront weekend and holiday availability type expectations are, and making sure that that is all communicated clearly. We also need to be building into those one-on-one times and those check-in times, ongoing dialogue about workload management so that we can be in the position where we're preventing chronic overload as a leader and ensuring that the tasks that we are assigning or asking or delegating, or what is more likely happening, people are volunteering for, making sure that those tasks are achievable and reasonable in the time that we've been given. This will give our employees the opportunity to advocate for themselves. They are controlling what their work looks like, which is hugely empowering and goes a long way to designing good teams. We're also step by step, conversation by conversation, as we're acting out and leading by example, shifting our team norms and culture away from being always on and setting a healthy culture for our teams. And leaning into that a little bit more, managing ourselves is probably one of the most important things we can do as we are leading well. Encouraging, if I'm encouraging you to take a break, I darn well better be doing that myself. I also need to resist being in crisis mode. So if I don't hear from you right away, I need to resist the urge to just get something checked off my list and start hitting you on other communication channels and platforms, texting, calling, all of the things. It's not always a crisis. And if it is a crisis, we should have a clear communication strategy in place for that. I need to disconnect from my own work and I need to add how well my team is doing to my own evaluation process. My team's well-being needs to be part of how I am evaluated. And if others can identify that maybe my team's not doing so hot, that's a reflection back on me and how I'm communicating and how I'm leading out. Leverage the technology you're given. And again, there are some team things and some leader things here. And really, it's all wrapped up into one package. So I have a couple of tools, and I can drop this into the chat here as Ron is wrapping up. I have a document with these different tools, and I'm more than happy to share my slides after we're all said and done today. There's different tool categories, and then there's some examples of each of the tools. I have personally experimented with these tools. I have downloaded some of them. I've looked through the reviews on them, and I feel like for the most part, these are really good ones to help us do the different types of disconnection, whether that be managing our notifications and those boundaries or helping us focus. The forest, the freedom, and the cold turkey are all pop-up blockers and access blockers. So if you step into the forest, um, your pop-up blocker goes into place, your web app blocker goes into place, and only the different tools you've highlighted can be shown. So that helps you not to be so distracted by all the stuff. Obviously, Microsoft Teams is out there. I do have a sample communication charter for Microsoft Team and a team expectation charter for using Teams that I'm happy to share with you if it's of interest. It really walks you through, again, that mindful use policies, and Teams itself has developed some walk-along tools for folks to kind of mitigate some of the concerns and hard things about using Teams, and Slack is the same way. Headspace, Calm, and the Insight Timer are all meditation apps to help you step away and do some mindfulness. There's alarms that are built into them and they can be timed. And then Todoist, Asana, Trello, Clockify, and then those Pomodoro timers can help you do some task management and time management there. I also don't know if you noticed, but all of my slides have been on a blue light reduction. This is another powerful thing we can be doing as we're recharging and unplugging, is setting our blue light filter on our screens. You can see on the left hand, that's a device with no filter. And on the right hand, that's actually the filter that's recommended for like 8 o'clock at night as you're winding down from the day. But I have chosen to set mine at the third level for all of my work. It just has helped me not be so stimulated by the screen in my computer. So another tool that you can leverage. And then a few years ago, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about an experiment. So a few years ago, Harvard Business had a side publication, and they had this whole experiment thing that they were rolling out. A lot in Kansas, a lot of our organizations, KLC, a lot of our agile teams are using these types of experiments for personal improvement, for team improvement, for project improvement. So what I'm really going to encourage you to do is, if you're on the call today, I'll put this in the chat as well here in just a minute on a Word document. Figure out which of those boundaries that we talked about at the beginning are the most difficult for you. How do you know it's a problem? How do you know that you've got a blurred boundary there? What are the signs that you're seeing? What are you hearing? What are you experiencing in your life at work that show you probably have a blurred boundary? What could you do out of the strategies we presented to change it, make it better, have a different outcome? And with that, make sure you're keeping it small, keep it simple. Let's take some baby steps. How are you going to try out making a change? Um, how will you know it's working? How will you know it's not working and maybe you need to try something else? How long will you try it? What resources and support might you need? And who can you ask to walk alongside you and help hold you accountable for whatever change it is you're going to make to improve your ability to unplug at the end of the day and from your work? I would really challenge you to choose something, try it for a week, have someone ask you about it. Maybe next week or next month, when we have our speaker in for Remote Work Wednesday, we'll ask if anybody tried an experiment and what was it? How did it go for you? How has it been after you've put that strategy in place and you've worked to architect your boundary? What questions do you have?
Wow, tremendous, Deborah. Thank you so much. I'd never heard of digital presenteeism, but now that you name it, I can see it. I did want to ask. Oh, by the way, my wife just has a timer on her watch, Fitbit, whatever the thing is, and so she tries to schedule, a reminder that it's time to take a break, take a stretch. I wanted to ask. Uh, One thing I observe is, say you have a volunteer organization that you're really involved with, and so you're all in on work, but then you transition, and then you're all in on this other activity. So, I mean, life seems to be a lot of multitasking these days. Um, is is that transition to a different focus different from taking a break, a full-fledged break, and getting away altogether? Any thought or comment on any of that?
Yeah, and I'd love to hear from the folks. I mean, I want to honor the fact we've got some pretty amazing remote workers on our chat today too. So anyone else, feel free to jump in, and I'll tell you what my thoughts are and what I think I've seen in the research. But that doesn't supplant our lived experiences around this Zoom room. So yes, I think taking, especially, let's talk about like you've planned two Pomodoros back to back, and you've got a 5 minute break in between. If I'm working on the same type of task batch in those two 25 minute Pomodoros, my 5 minute break in between is probably not going to be an intensive, like I'm not going to fully unplug during that time. But I am going to get up and move around, change my posture, do something a little bit different so that I can come back not in the same physical location. So I think there's two things you're doing. You're taking the physical break and you're taking a little bit of a mental break. But that's why after the four Pomodoros, there's a 15 to 30 minute, you got to step away and do something different completely. But I think that's a really intuitive question. What has everybody else experienced?
Yeah, Crystal notes using the boundary stops. Appreciate the app suggestions. Linda, did you have a comment?
I was just gonna say, I have a real hard time with that because if I get into something, I'll set my timers, but I'm in the middle of something. It's like, okay, I'll take a break as soon as I'm done with this. And next thing I know, it's an hour later. But
Yeah.
it's really hard for me to stick with that. And also, like blocking things out. I would love to just look at my email twice a day, but I have things come in throughout the day that I have to act on right away. So I have a really hard time with, um, I guess, having less distractions or trying to limit them, I guess.
So, Linda, I really hold in high regard and respect the presentation you did for us earlier this year. It was fantastic. And I
Thank you.
think you all already have a lot of things in play with on your team that really help your folks be successful as remote workers. I'm wondering, and I'll be honest, I have gone through different phases in my career where I've been able to do the 2 times a day email check. And the times where we've been successful was because I did communicate it well with the rest of my team. And they knew like some of those things, you're right. They're an immediacy issue, but email's probably not the best way to communicate with me by that. For those types of things. That needs to go in a Slack or a Teams message or something like that that I could be checking. And I know if someone's going to hit me on it, it really is a time I need to do it right now. The difficulty with the email communication is I'm not just responding to those one-off things where they need an immediate response. I'm going down that whole thing because then I've got 50 emails and I want that box empty, and I'm
Exactly.
taking care of all the things that aren't necessarily time sensitive. So to help me be more disciplined in what I'm choosing to respond to in my email, I'm only going to check it twice. And if you truly need something from me immediately, you're going to get me a different way.
That's a great
Which is
idea.
way easier to say than
You
it is to
catch, you
do.
catch
I
me
own
on
it.
anything.
Oh, Patsy Maddie, you've been working remotely for a long time. What do you have to share with us?
Well, actually, this is just my second year. So I was always in the office before, but I didn't know how well I would like it. But I'm kind of like Linda. If I get started with something, I don't want to quit because then you lose your focus. And so I'm pretty guilty about not taking breaks. And also, I was practicing that presenteeism
Yes.
earlier because I had to get notes ready for my next meeting coming up here shortly. And so I was listening, but I have two screens. And so, but you really can't multitask. You can, but you don't have your focus, where it needs to be. But um, I'm guilty about not taking breaks. I'm guilty about, checking my email constantly because there are some things that you have to respond to right away. Um, but I agree. If it's an urgent thing, send me a text, send me a Teams or whatever. Um, and I'm also guilty. There just isn't enough time in the day. I don't take my annual leave like I should, although I did schedule a break to go to Florida to see my kids in a couple of weeks. So, but I feel guilty about doing that. And you shouldn't. But how do you get past that? How do you get past that? You know, I shouldn't feel guilty about taking time that I've earned. But yeah.
I was trying to find my reactions, which I can't find because I have all the other screens open right now. I was going to give you the confetti reaction for your taking time off.
Yeah. Yeah. I need a break. I need to unplug,
Yep.
get away and get refreshed. And I do, when I do take a break, we live out on the farm, I go outside because that is the best way for me to unplug because there are so many other, things out there that grab your attention. And so if I stay in my office or in the house even, I'm going to find something else to do. So I go outside.
Deborah, there's a question in the chat about co-working space. We talked about the blurring the boundaries between when you're in the home office. What about co-working spaces?
Well, I haven't seen I'm so glad that you asked that, Leah. This is one of the questions that I had, even as I was putting my slides together and reviewing the research that we've done and looked at as we've been offering the ROI courses. I've not seen any research done on which is better or how is there one that leads to more productivity. I think it's probably I'm going to just say, and I'd love to hear again what the rest of you have to say as well, but my thought is if you have a co-working space available and it's economically feasible for you, and you can have a space in that space to work, I can see how it would be valuable to get me out of my house and have that isolated place that I know I'm going to and get some of those rituals in place. I think then you come into the same thing where I'm going to be distracted by the five other people I'm working with remotely. And if it's creating additional stress and anxiety because it's a financial expense I can't accommodate in my community, then it's not helpful. So then you've got to choose the best thing for you. Um, yeah. Has anybody else seen any research or heard anything on this type of a scenario?
Their question goes on to ask about, I assume that's directories of coworker spaces in rural areas, and it's much more common in the urban areas. We did have an example in Plainville
Yep.
where it's purely a volunteer example. In that case, volunteers were running. I mean, Leah, I'm not sure what area specifically you had in mind, but I tell you, I'm thankful the McDonald's has free Wi-Fi. I found as I travel, I end up at McDonald's using that as I go from spot to spot.
Now I know what to get you for gift cards, Ron. We'll just get you some McDonald's gift cards for you to take on the road because you're going to be there anyway.
Believe it or not, I remember the days when I was traveling and I would go from library to library before I
Mhm.
had so I could check emails at the library computer. Oh
Yeah.
my goodness,
Yeah.
pre-smartphone.
Back to that, and I know we're getting close on time. As I was putting the presentation together, Leah, I have a space that I work in at home. I have not been diligent as a student or an employee about only working in that space. And that has really been a detriment to me. And I was thinking if I were a fully remote worker right now and didn't have an office, I think I would go to a co-working space or I would find an office to rent. Um, and I, again, financially, I don't know what that how to build that in, but I just think for me, I'm gonna have to figure out better ways to get that separation.
I
Yeah.
do a pretty good job of that. I get up in the morning, I get dressed for work, and then I get my what did you call it?
Your
Work drink.
beverage?
My
Yes.
work
Beverage,
drink.
office beverage.
And then I go into my office space.
Yep.
Now, I do occasionally work somewhere else in my home, but for the most part, if I'm going to work, I come into my office. So I guess I'm doing one good thing.
You're doing lots of good things and don't should on yourself. Let's
I-
just try and experiment and move forward.
There you go.
Yeah, mixing it up within the house, I think, can be helpful. Sometimes I'll go down to like our dining room table. So, my question about working remotely and rural directories for those co-working spaces just stemmed out of a need for external, professional relationships. So we have our church communities, we have our coworkers that are online, but how are we creating like different connections within our own communities, even if we are remote workers? And so that's kind of something that I've been thinking about more. I live in Holton, Kansas, so it's not a big city, but there are at least a couple other I think a couple other millennials who are working remotely. And so we're going to try to connect at a coffee shop coming up here soon. But just trying to nurture those in-person relationships too, since we are working remotely.
We talk about building an ecosystem for remote work across the state. We've been talking about that for a long time, and particularly in our rural communities. I mean, that's a real passion area of Ron's. I wonder if we don't have some room here that we could do some more work around that. I'm thinking of a building that was for sale on the square in Holton that had the meeting space in the bottom and the apartment upstairs. Like that would have been a perfect co-working space. If we would have, if someone in the community had seen that as a need and purchased it, it was a great space. It still is a great space, but I just think maybe there's some opportunities to do some development around that for us as a team and extension and more broadly with our Kansas Works folks and our Department of Commerce.
Linda's comment in the chat is about contacting the local chamber.
Oh,
In the case of Great Bend, it sounds like they have resources for local remote workers. In Patsy's case, economic development has space downtown. I'm thinking about young professional groups. There are young professional groups, at least in some communities, where young folks get together and socialize and share. I think that's going to be all the more important for those working remotely who don't have the social network otherwise. I mean, just to build the social capital is going to be important. Well, thanks. Gosh, thank you, Deborah, for an outstanding presentation. I'll give you a virtual round of applause here at least, and really, really appreciate this. Our next Remote Work Wednesday, as mentioned, comes up on July 9. Thank you, Leah. April Darnell relocated from Manhattan, Kansas to Florida, and she is glad to share her action steps, the specific steps that she took in that progression. So we look forward to you joining us on July 9 for our next Remote Work Wednesday. With that, thanks again to everyone for joining us. Please feel free to share these. This will be posted on the resources tab under kansasremotework.com. Thanks very much, Deborah. And just want to wish everyone a terrific Remote Work Wednesday. Thank you.